Hi there, my name is Irene, and in this video, I would like to discuss SketchUp system rules. So by this, I mean the following. If you have worked with AutoCAD or Revit or ArchiCAD or any of the, let's just call them the Autodesk suite softwares, when you go to SketchUp, you might feel uncomfortable. You might be trying to do things and then it's like, things don't work the way that I expect to or the way that I want to. This is because of the way that SketchUp system rules are set up. So let's go over what they are, and maybe this will bring some clarity to why SketchUp behaves the way it does. So let's get to it. All right, so I'm in a new empty SketchUp file. The template that you choose does not matter at all. Templates in SketchUp really don't matter. They really just determine the style of your SketchUp appearance and what unit system you're working with, and those can be changed very, very easily. So let's get started with these system rules. So the first one is going to be the importance of the axis. The axis is this guy over here. And basically, it identifies the three, let's call them directions of a 3D model. Now, the reason that I'm not labeling those directions yet is precisely the particularity of the axis in SketchUp. So the first thing that I want to mention is that if you go to View, you can actually turn the axis off, but I would very much not do that. Especially if you're getting started with SketchUp, the axis is actually a very helpful compass. Like it can help you very quickly identify where you are standing in your SketchUp world and then reorient yourself. But now let's talk about the meaning of the axis directions. So the axes in SketchUp are set up by color. So you have red, green, and blue. But the interesting thing about these SketchUp axes is that it carries additional information. So this is actually the first system rule of SketchUp. If you remember I had a video about why SketchUp is the way it is. One of the things that I discussed was that the developers of SketchUp wanted to create a program that would not be intimidating, that would be very easy for basically anyone to pick up. And one of the ways that they achieved this was by basically imbuing a thing with multiple meanings or multiple functions. So what's going on here with the axis is that the axis actually carries a lot of meaning. So let's see what are some of the meanings. So the first one is, yes, your axis is red, green, and blue, but your axis is also X, Y, and Z. X being red, Y being green, Z being blue. You can see this because if you import 3D models that come from software in which the axis works on an X, Y, and Z, when you bring those models into SketchUp, the X, Y, and Z axes will perfectly align with your red, green, and blue. So that's the first layer. X, Y, and Z is layered into red, green, blue. The second layer is going to be standard views. So in a previous video, I talked about the standard views. You can find them under the camera and standard views. And then you have kind of like the standard views that we work with in construction documentation. So top views, front view, side view, back, so on and so forth. And those views are actually mapped to your axes. So along the red axis, you're going to have the right and left. Along the green axis, you're going to have the front and back. And along the blue axis, you are going to have the top and bottom. And once again, if you want to verify that, I'm going to quickly here model a simple little house. I'm not going to bother too much with adding detail because in this case, it doesn't matter. So what I want you to notice is that if I go, for example, to a front view, what you're going to see is that my green axis is kind of coming towards the camera. So that means that we are aligned on the green axis. If I go to, let's say, a right side view, you're going to see that now the green axis is the one that is coming towards the camera. And if I switch to a top view, then it will be the blue. But wait, there's more. Because you also have polar coordinates mapped on your axis. The green axis is going to correspond to the north and south. The red axis is going to correspond to east and west. And I guess that the blue one corresponds to altitude. And the way that you can verify that is with your shadows. So I'm going to turn on my shadows. You can either turn them on through the view settings, but this just kind of turns them on and off. If you want to control the properties of your shadows, you actually have to go to Window, Default Tray, and turn on the... Oh no, they are here. Where are they? Shadows, they were there already. If I turn on my shadows, what I want you to remember is that the sun rises in the east, which means that your shadows during daytime are cast on the west. And then as the day goes by, the sun sets in the west, which means that your shadows will move towards the east. The sun usually tilts towards the south, which means that your shadows will always go towards the north. So check it out. If I go to a top view, what's going to happen is that, see how my shadows are inclining towards the north? And then look what happens. Right now, on the time of the day is like afternoon. So that means that my sun is setting in the west. My shadows are in the east. If I move towards the daytime, look at that. And if I change the time of the year, see how it always stays towards the north because the sun always tilts towards the south. So there you have it. We have 3 pieces of additional information mapped onto our axes. So, and again, this is just for the axes, but you're going to find that there are many other commands that layer information. I'm going to give you one more example. We have the move command. So the move command is going to allow you to move geometry. But also, if you press a secret key, which I'm going to talk about in another video, you can use move to copy. So again, you're going to find that SketchUp actually has a lot of the fancy commands that you can find in programs like 3ds Max or Revit or whatnot. They're just hidden. They're not like immediately available. And it's not unless you are a professional that you make use of them. So that's the first system rule. Things are layered. Some of them are hidden. The second rule, and this one is very, very important, I'm going to delete all of this, is that SketchUp has been lying to you all of this time. Because in reality, SketchUp isn't actually a 3D modeling software. SketchUp is a software of 2D geometry pretending to be 3D. So what do I mean with this? Well, if I come here and I create a box, in your brain, this is a box. It's a cube. It has 6 sides. It has 3 dimensions, width, depth, and height. It has a volume. And if I select it, I should be able to select the whole thing. But that's not the way that SketchUp views it. SketchUp views all geometry as raw geometry. And by raw geometry, I basically mean that it is just built out of the essential building blocks. So all geometry in SketchUp is made out of points, lines, and faces. And the way that you can verify this is because, for example, after I've created this box, if I come here and I select one face, I can delete that face and you're going to see that my box is hollow. There is no volume. So that's a very interesting thing. You're going to notice that there is no scenario in SketchUp in which you can measure volume. You can measure length. So for example, if I select this line, I can get the length of this line. If I select this face here, I can get its area, but there's no way of getting volume in SketchUp, at least by default, because SketchUp has no volume because SketchUp is not 3D. So everything in SketchUp is made out of 2D objects pretending to be 3D objects. In that case, it's actually a lot easier to think about SketchUp something like maquettes or like origami. Like you can think about working in SketchUp as working with paper to create 3D geometries. Following on this, now let's talk about that raw geometry. So that is the next system rule. Everything in SketchUp is made out of those basic building blocks of raw geometry, which are points, lines, and faces. So again, when SketchUp looks at this geometry, it doesn't see a box. And once we understand that, that opens our mind to work within the boundaries of SketchUp. Because, for example, when it comes to deforming geometry, instead of me deforming a cube, what I can do now is I can deform that raw geometry. So I could, for example, say that I want to move a point. And that is going to allow me to create a modification that is far more complex than what I could do if I would just approach this as a box, right? Same thing. If I pick this line, look at that kind of modification. So in SketchUp, everything is made out of these 3 elements that are referred to as raw geometry. The next rule is the way that these raw geometry interacts with each other. So the rule is points affect lines, lines affect faces, faces do not affect other faces. So what does this mean? Well, for example, if I come here, let's say, I'm going to draw a line. So I'm going to go line and I'm going to draw a line here. And now I'm going to come here and I'm going to draw another line. So if I would ask you how many lines there are here, if you work with AutoCAD or you work with, I don't know, like Revit or 3ds Max or any other program, you can see that I'm a pretty Autodesk heavy user. If you work with any of those programs, you're going to tell me there's 2 lines. There's the first line and there's the second line. But that's not the way that SketchUp sees it. Because as soon as I created the second line, overlapping, intersecting with the first line, that created a point right here. And that point will cut your lines into smaller segments. So points cut lines, lines cut faces. So for example, if I come here and I draw a rectangle, now I have one face. But if I come here and I draw a line crossing that face, now I have two faces. So see, geometry is very flexible, very volatile in SketchUp. Everything can be very easily affected by other things, whether that is intentional or not. So you kind of have to be careful. And then finally, you have faces do not affect other faces. So for example, if I would copy this cube here, and I'm going to move it a little bit higher just to get the exact effect. If I intersect this cube into this other cube, what you're going to see is that this face and this face are kind of like crashing into each other, but they're not interacting with each other. It's just points and lines. So points to lines, lines to faces. Okay. That being said, the same way that we can use points to cut lines and lines to cut faces, you can also use those same rules to heal geometry. So for example, if I want these two faces to become one, all I need to do is get rid of the line between them, and they go back to being a single line. Same thing here. It doesn't matter which one I select, as long as I select any of the segments that are creating the intersection and I get rid of them, that will heal the remaining segments of your line. The next rule is going to be the relationship between lines and faces. So this is irrelevant of the cutting or healing, and that is that lines do not need faces to exist, but faces need lines to exist. Faces need a boundary to define them. So for example, once again, when I draw this geometry here, this is actually 5 elements. We have one face and 4 lines. What happens is that if I just want to have the 4 lines, I can do that. I can select the face and I can delete it, and that's fine. Nothing is going to happen. The lines do not need the face to exist. But if I come here and I delete any of the lines that define the boundary of the face, the whole face will collapse. So faces need their boundary lines to exist. This rule in particular is super important to understand, because what happens a lot of times to people is that they will see their model and there will be like a random line in the model and they're like, oh, that line looks ugly. They will select that line and delete that line, and then a bunch of things disappear and they panic and they're like, oh my God, what I did. Well, what you did is that you probably deleted a boundary line for some other geometry. The same way, what's going to happen sometimes is that whenever SketchUp detects a closed loop, a closed boundary of lines, it will assume that you want to have a face there, and therefore it will flood that boundary with a face. So it's automatic, and the same thing happens. Sometimes people are drawing something and suddenly a face will appear out of nowhere and they're like, oh my God, did I do something wrong? No, it's just that SketchUp detected a closed boundary and it filled it in for you. Now, the most important rule is that everything in SketchUp is sticky. So what do I mean with that? Well, let's say that I have this box. I drew this box a while ago, like it's a box, it has 6 sides, blah, blah, blah. So now let's say that I come here and I draw a second box. I want to have a box next to the first one. So now I have 2 boxes, right? Wrong. Remember, SketchUp doesn't see volume. SketchUp sees lines and faces. And remember, lines cut faces, points cut lines. So what happens is that as soon as I created this second box, this line and this line, for example, merge with this face to cut it. So as soon as raw geometry interacts with each other, it will fuse, because raw geometry is very volatile. So why is this bad? Well, because if I would want to move this box, look what's going to happen. I select the entire box and I go to move it. Oh, Jesus Christ, what's going on? The amount of times that this has happened to me. So again, the reason that this is happening is, and I don't know if you can quite see it, see how what's happening here is that like my previous box has kind of like fused together with the new box where the lines are. So again, this is because of the way that raw geometry interacts. So you need to be very, very careful with that, because once geometry merges or fuses together, you can separate it, but it's very hard and very tedious. So what we're going to learn in the future is that there are certain ways to avoid these completely, and that way is through groups and components. But this is the double-edged sword that makes SketchUp such an attractive software, because due to the fact that all geometry is raw, it is very easy to make modifications. So like I can just grab a line and say, okay, I'm going to put that line, I don't know, I'm going to put it here, and then I'm going to put it there. Ooh, and that created an interesting form. And then I'm going to select, I don't know, this other point here, and I'm going to bring it down, and I'm going to, I don't know, select this entire face, and I'm going to move it there. So these volatileness This flexibility of raw geometry is what makes modeling with SketchUp so easy. But if you do not understand that this is how SketchUp geometry works, you're going to struggle because you're going to be fighting the program constantly. You're going to be like, no, it's two boxes and they should stay together. And that's just not the way that SketchUp works. The last rule that I want to mention is that your camera position will affect the way that you can draw things. So again, if I draw this line here, and then I draw another line here, and I ask you, what is the relationship between these two lines in terms of position? Every single person is going to have a different answer. Somebody is going to say that this line is under this line. Somebody is going to say that this line is behind this line or in front of this line, or like whatever number of possibilities. And the truth is that it's a little bit like Schrodinger's cat. You're not going to know until you orbit around. Oh, wow, turns out that this guy was in front of that guy. And you never know because, again, the 2D screen doesn't allow you to understand the 3D perspective. So how can we draw when we're drawing in SketchUp? Because I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that I got a commission to create the new extension for the Rum Museum in Toronto. If you're not familiar, Google it. It looks nightmarish. But let's say that I've been commissioned to do an extension. So I'm going to go to line and I want to keep on in style with what the newer extension was. So I'm going to go just like, yes, art. And this is going to be like my new extension to the museum, right? So based on the rules that we have already learned, when I close this loop, I should get a face, right? Because, you know, closed loop gets flooded with a face. Click, nothing. Why could that possibly be? Well, to get the answer, you need to orbit. Oh, Jesus Christ. Ooh. So remember, SketchUp is a 2D modeling software. Faces are 2D. You cannot have a 3D face. So basically, you cannot flood this boundary with a face because that face would have to cover space in all three directions. And therefore, you just don't get a face. So this is a huge problem in SketchUp. People drawing something thinking that it's going in one direction. It's not going in that direction. So how can we solve that? Well, there's a couple options. So option number one is to actually pay attention to the inputs that SketchUp is giving you. So if I'm drawing a line, you're going to see that by default, the line is black. But if I start moving my line towards an axis, so let's say that I'm going to move it towards the red axis, once I get close enough to being parallel with it, you're going to notice that it's going to snap. So your line is going to snap to become aligned with the red axis, and it's going to turn red, and then it's going to tell you you are now on the red axis. So it is hard to miss. And you can do this with every axis. You can do it with the green axis. You can do it with the blue axis. So all you have to do is pay attention to the color of the line. So see, now it's green, now it's red, and now it's blue. This doesn't make any sense, right? Like I'm going in the same direction as before. Before it was green and now it's blue. So what is going on? Well, what's happening is that, remember, the default view in SketchUp is perspective, and perspective means that things are deformed. Closer, bigger, further, smaller. So what's happening here is that like I cannot have these two lines in the exact same angle. What's going to happen is that I need to look for kind of like an open angle, an open perspective. So I'm going to need to start just kind of like wiggling around my line until I find where the green axis is on this location of my screen. Oh, it's there. So this is the one thing that I do not like about this method. You kind of have to go on this like wild goose chase to figure out where the hell your line is supposed to fall. But if you're just drawing a single line or something very simple, it gets the job done. There is a better way, and that is arrow key locked references. So I think I actually mentioned that in a previous video, but if you're drawing a line and I click, you're going to see that SketchUp is going to tell you that you can use your arrow keys to lock inference directions. So what that means is I can use my arrow keys to tell SketchUp which direction I want to go. And it basically has your axes mapped. The right arrow key is going to be for the red axis, left arrow key for the green axis, and up arrow key for the blue axis. And you can just switch back and forth between whichever one you want. If you change your mind and you don't want your line to be locked to an axis, all you have to do is press that same axis direction. So right now we're in red. If I press my right arrow key again, it's just going to release my line. And the cool thing about this method is that once you get used to it, you can go really fast through modeling. So for example, I'm going to go left, click, left, right click, left click, 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 right click, left click. See how fast I'm moving? So I really like this because basically what happens, the way that I want you to think about it is like this. SketchUp is an intuitive software, which basically means that SketchUp is going to try to make decisions for you. But SketchUp is terrible at making decisions. You should not trust it. So the more decisions you make, the more instructions you give to SketchUp, the less there is for SketchUp to intuit, and the more you can just focus on the thing that you want to do. So arrow keys are fantastic. The other thing that I really like about the arrow keys is that because my line is locked on only being able to go in one direction, that actually releases my cursor to go use any other point or inferences within my model as a reference. So for example, let's say that I want this green line to end up around the same point that this guy here is. So see, if my line is not locked, what's going to happen is that when I move my cursor here, it's going to like lock that. I could use the from point, but it can sometimes be annoying. But if I lock my axis on green, now I can literally bring my cursor here and just say like, well, I want it to end up exactly at the same distance in green that this other point is, and then click and then click. Now I want to clarify something. I demonstrated this arrow key command with the line command, but this actually applies for a bunch of things, both drawing commands and modification commands. So for example, if I want to use the rotate command, you can use the arrow keys to change the direction of the rotation. If I use the rectangle command, I can use the arrow keys to choose which direction my rectangle goes on, and so on and so forth. So the arrow keys are like a super powerful tool in SketchUp. But there's a teeny tiny problem, and that is the fact that this only really works if you just like drawing little boxes. If you want to draw a curve, or you want to draw something that is at an angle, sorry, we're out of luck. Except that we're not, because this is where the final trick will come in, which is that your views don't just move your camera. They actually also set up your work plane. So when I go to the top view, and you can check that you're in the right place, because on the top left, you will actually be able to see that like it's telling you that you're on the top view. If you orbit, you will lose that camera position. So once you are in a standard view, it is recommended that you only move using pan and zoom. So that way you remain on that top view. So when you choose a standard view, you're not just choosing a standard view, you're also choosing a work plane. And specifically, if I'm going with the top view, the work plane is going to be red and green. So check it out. If I go here and I make my same like extension to the ROM museum, so I'm going to go like, absolute insanity. And I close it. This time, it will flood with a face. Because when I set up my view to a top view, I told SketchUp all of my lines should be in red and green. So when I orbit, that's exactly what it did. And it switched my, it set up my blue to 0. And this is on any view. So for example, if I delete this and instead I go to the front view, see, now we're in the front view. The work plane of the front view is red and blue. So if I go here and I do exactly the same thing, just like, random, I have to scream while I make these, and I close it, it's going to give me a face because it has reduced the third axis to 0, and it's just working on those two axes. So this is the way that we draw in SketchUp. You choose a standard view and you start. And the thing is that this makes logical sense. Like when I see people drawing on perspective, I can't help to wonder why we humans like to make our lives harder. Because think about it this way. If you're a designer, when you are designing, unless you're Zaha Hadid, usually what's going to happen is that you're starting with a floor plan, or you're starting with an elevation of a wall, and then you're sketching your layout, right? So layouts are always 2D. And then what happens is that when you're putting in the details, then you're thinking in 3D. So if your reference is in 2D and SketchUp only works in 2D, why the hell are you drawing in 3D? Like all you have to do is choose a standard view and go. And with that, we have reached the end of this video. So as you can see, these rules are not necessarily rules. Maybe that's not the right word. They're more like idiosyncrasies of SketchUp. But the thing is that if you don't understand them, then you're always going to be fighting against the program. But if you're aware of them, you're actually going to be going with the flow of SketchUp. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, leave it a like, maybe subscribe. If you have any questions, by all means, feel free to leave them in the comments. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.